Red Bull reveals secret instructions they received from F1 bosses to stop their domination. The new Monza track surface could hurt Mercedes, and Ferrari could be the fastest car from Monza. Do consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's get straight into the latest F1 news. Williams has confirmed that it has dropped Logan Sargent for the remainder of the 2024 season to be replaced by reserve driver Franco Colapinto. But who is Franco Colapinto? And how did he come by his super license points? This is everything you need to know. Franco Colapinto is an Argentine racer born on May 27, 2003. And at just 21 years old, he's already deeply accomplished. Colapinto started out in go-karts when he was just 9 years old, and he quickly took to the discipline, winning the 2016 Argentine Championship followed by a karting victory in the Youth Summer Olympics of 2018. Colapinto debuted in Open Wheels F4 Spanish Championship in 2018 for just one round. In 2019, he won the Spanish F4 title and made appearances in Formula Renault Eurocup and the Euro Formula Open Championship. Then, 2020 saw him finish third in both Formula Renault Eurocup and the Toyota Racing Series, an open-wheel championship in New Zealand. 2021 was busy for Colapinto. He finished third in the Asian Le Mans Series, fourth in the European Le Mans Series, and sixth in the Formula Regional European Championship, despite withdrawing from 4 races. He competed in Formula 3 in both 2022 and 2023, finishing 9th and 4th in the championship respectively. It was enough to earn him a Formula 2 seat at MP Motorsport, where one victory has put him 6th overall in the championship. Back in January of 2023, Colapinto was announced as joining the Williams Driver Academy. In December of that year, he tested the FW45 during the post-season Abu Dhabi test, where he completed 65 laps and set the 22nd fastest time overall. He also made his practice debut in Formula 1 this year at the British Grand Prix. His next outing will be in FP1 at Monza, where he will be a full-time F1 driver. Does Franco Colapinto have a super license? Many casual Formula 1 fans took to social media to ask just how Colapinto has qualified for that license. We want to break this down to make it easier to understand. In order to qualify for a super license, drivers must meet a handful of criteria, including an accumulation of at least 40 super license points over the previous 3 seasons in any combination of valid championships. However, because of COVID-19, Colapinto is able to count his best 3 years from a 4-year period that includes 2021. Fernando Alonso believes Ferrari should be the car to beat at Monza this weekend, and at the Singapore Grand Prix in September as well. The Scuderia have not won a race since Charles Leclerc's emotional home victory in Monaco back in May, but with team principal Fred Vasseur having predicted prior to the summer break that Monza and Singapore should suit the SF24, Alonso agrees with that assessment. Ferrari took 3rd and 5th places at the Dutch Grand Prix through Leclerc and Carlos Sainz respectively, with Sainz recovering from a Q2 exit to make it back into the top 5, while Leclerc held off the McLaren of Oscar Piastri for the majority of the race after leapfrogging him at the start. But with Monza presenting a completely different challenge for the teams, Alonso predicts the Scuderia should be a factor for the race victory this weekend. I think the top 4 teams, maybe Mercedes, are a little bit up and down, but McLaren, Red Bull, and Ferrari, they are podium contenders every weekend, Alonso told media including PlanetF1.com at Zandvoort. Next 2 races, for example, Ferrari should be the car to beat. You know what we saw last year in Monza and Singapore, Leclerc winning Monaco this year, also for Singapore. I think they will be the favorite. As for his team, Aston Martin struggled to keep pace with the top 4 teams in the Netherlands, Alonso finishing in the last of the points-paying positions and a lap behind race winner Lando Norris. Given he was behind the Alpine of Pierre Gasly on the day, with his former team having had the slowest car on the grid at the start of the season, Alonso explained the team need to get better for the remainder of the season. "Yeah, I think so," Alonso responded, when asked if a 10th place finish was the best available result to him on Sunday. "Probably even 1 point is a little bit too much for the pace we had, but we did a good qualifying yesterday and starting P7 obviously. That gave us the possibility to score this point. We need to get better. There are a couple of races already that we are struggling to keep up with some of the midfield teams, and we need to understand why, and we need to get better." Christian Horner said Red Bull have gone from being asked to slow down by Formula 1 CEO Stefano Domenicali to McLaren being the clear benchmark team. Red Bull, fresh from winning 21 of 22 races last season, started F1 2024 in dominant fashion as Max Verstappen flew into another world championship lead, but they have since been reeled in and overtaken in the competitive order by McLaren. McLaren's Lando Norris beat Verstappen by 22.8 seconds in front of his home crowd at Zandvoort at the weekend. Norris showing Verstappen-esque dominance of his own in the MCL 38 as Red Bull struggled to keep pace. Having started the season with the RB20 as the dominant car, McLaren has gradually pulled the gap back to Red Bull before establishing a competitive advantage. But Verstappen still holds a 70-point lead in the Drivers' Championship, while Red Bull still lead the Constructors' standings. That turnaround, Horner believes, is a sign of how things can change in Formula One. It just shows that things can move very quickly, Horner told media, including PlanetF1.com. I mean, we were winning races by 20-25 seconds, and Stefano was asking us to slow down in the first 5 races. And then it can change very quickly, and that means it can change back the other way as well. We know we've got an issue. You can hear that Max, certainly today, Sunday, he didn't feel that the car was responding to what he wanted. I think we've obviously got to be able to manifest that into a setup that works these tires and across all conditions, and McLaren did that with Lando today. We weren't able to, but we limited the damage. If you can't win it, finish second. The McLaren has been the benchmark car over the last few races, and we're very acutely aware that we need to respond to that, and everybody in Milton Keynes is working incredibly hard to address that. When asked more about describing McLaren as the benchmark team, Horner added, "It is now Red Bull's responsibility to respond to their pace, with a slender advantage in the Constructors' Championship that has shrunk to 30 points following the Dutch Grand Prix." McLaren is setting the benchmark now, Horner stated. That's clear in terms of pace. They've been that at the last couple of races, or certainly in Hungary, they were very competitive. Spa, it was Mercedes. Here, Zandvoort, Lando in particular was very strong. So definitely, they have the fastest car at the moment, and we have to respond to that. It's not rocket science. There are no silver bullets in this business. It's a matter of understanding the problem, addressing the problem, and then implementing fixes to it. Carlos Sainz believes the one certainty for the remainder of the F1 2024 season is that McLaren will be the team to beat for the rest of the field. Lando Norris beat Max Verstappen in front of his home crowd at Zandvoort by 22.8 seconds on Sunday, after taking pole by a significant 0.356 margin the day beforehand, which led the British driver to admit that McLaren now 100% have the best package in Formula One. Ferrari, meanwhile, appear to have clawed back some of the deficit they faced prior to the summer break with a strong performance at Zandvoort, Charles Leclerc getting onto the podium for the Scuderia and Sainz recovering to 5th after starting 10th. Given the size of Norris's gap to the rest of the field, the 29-year-old predicts that his former colleagues should have an edge on the rest for the remainder of the season, and everyone else will be in a congested fight behind. There is one certainty, and that is that McLaren will be ahead in all the races that are left. They are the team to beat, Sainz told DAS in Spain. Then between Red Bull, Mercedes, and us, there is always a trend. Max will always be there because he never fails, but the rest of us are there. You have to believe that a podium in every race is possible. It can always be very tight. Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur had highlighted before the summer break that the Italian and Singapore Grand Prix could be stronger events for the Scuderia, potentially playing into the positive aspects of the SF24. Sainz echoed that sentiment when asked about his hopes heading into Monza this weekend, with a fervent fan base expected at the Temple of Speed. To be a bit more optimistic, he said when asked about Ferrari's hopes at home. It's clear that we had a very good pace today. If we are not the fastest in qualifying at Monza either, we will be able to fight in the race. It's clear that this season, with how tight everything is, someone from the top 4 teams can do badly in qualifying, but then in the race you can be 1 or 2 tenths faster than the others and overtake them, so we have to stay optimistic and not give up. Qualifying with this car is tricky, but the races allow you a bit more. Over the last few days, Liam Lawson has been strongly linked to a mid-season Williams move. James Vowles was very interested in securing his services, seeing Lawson as capable of scoring points in the FW46. However, Red Bull were reluctant to let the 22-year-old go, even for a brief loan stint. Here's why. The unpredictable driver situation at Red Bull is now common knowledge in F1 circles. Although Christian Horner consistently defends Sergio Perez in interviews, it is no secret the 34-year-old's seat is under threat. Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda are constantly being evaluated. In the event Red Bull drops Perez, one of these drivers will be promoted. Ricciardo is generally seen as the most likely replacement for the Mexican driver. Despite Tsunoda's strong performances this year, Christian Horner clearly prefers Ricciardo. Assuming that Tsunoda does not blow him away in the upcoming rounds, the Australian is in a strong position. Regardless of when and if Red Bull make a change, Liam Lawson stands to gain from the situation. Despite Red Bull's hesitance to offer Lawson a full-time contract, they are aware of his talent. The Austrian squad wants to avoid a scenario where a rival, like Audi, can take Lawson from them before 2025. Of course, these hypotheticals make things very complicated at Milton Keynes. Thankfully for Lawson, Red Bull's reluctance to send him on loan, even just for 9 rounds, is evidence that a full-time contract with VCARB is on the horizon. In theory, an agreement between Williams and Red Bull could have been possible. However, James Vowles was never going to sign a driver whose availability could not be guaranteed for 3 months. Meanwhile, Mick Schumacher was not a convincing option for Vowles. The Williams team principal then turned to his own academy. He decided on Franco Colapinto, who is 6th in the Formula 2 standings, as the replacement for Logan Sargent. Considering the 21-year-old is in his rookie campaign, his performances are very impressive. The Argentine is also ahead of Kimi Antonelli, one of the most highly anticipated talents in recent years. Whilst direct comparisons in Formula 2 are never easy, there is enough evidence to suggest that Colapinto can hold his own. Williams had the opportunity to evaluate his abilities in the 2023 postseason test in Abu Dhabi. They could also observe Colapinto's progress at Silverstone this year when he drove in FP1. Liam Lawson was always the first option for James Vowles. Based on Lawson's efforts last year, he was an obviously desirable option. However, because Red Bull already have plans for him, a deal failed to materialize. Formula One teams face a step into the unknown this weekend, with a newly resurfaced Monza set to throw up some surprises at the Italian Grand Prix. As part of a major revamp to modernize the famous Autodromo, which has included work on access tunnels and infrastructure, the entire track has been resurfaced. New asphalt often has a big impact on the characteristics of a venue, and early indications already point to a notable step change that could become a big talking point over the Monza weekend. One of the key findings from an inspection that Pirelli engineers did in early August on the new surface was its darker coloring meant it retained more heat than the old surface, something which could have a big impact on tire temperatures. In a briefing note sent out by Pirelli, it noted, "As is usually the case with newly laid asphalt, the surface is smoother than its predecessor and darker in color. This latter factor will have an impact on track temperature, which if the sun is shining could see it get hotter than in the past, even reaching significant highs of over 50 degrees Celsius. In theory, the new surface should offer more grip, which will impact tire performance and their operating temperature range. As early weather forecasts point to temperatures in the low 30 degrees C range for the duration of the event, it means the fight that most teams will face over the weekend is in ensuring their rubber does not overheat. That challenge is something that may not be great news for Mercedes, because its W15 car appears to be one of the most susceptible to its tires overheating in hot conditions and falling out of the perfect operating temperature range. At hotter races like Spain, Austria, and Hungary, where it was harder to keep tire temperatures under control, Mercedes was more on the back foot than cooler events like the Canadian and British GPs. Speaking before the summer, Mercedes trackside operations director Andrew Shovlin pinpointed tire temperature management as an area that Mercedes needed to be better at. "I think at tracks like Silverstone, we had a very stable rear end. In Austria and Budapest, we lacked stability," he said. "That's all down to the fact that we seem to be putting more temperature in the tires than the others. We know we need to work on that area. We've got plans to do that, but that's not the sort of problem you can fix with a single aero update. It will be the result of quite a few developments to try and get on top of it." But while initial indications do not look ideal for Mercedes, most teams admit that there is a degree of uncertainty about the impact of the Monza changes. Haas team boss Ayao Komatsu said, "The biggest challenge for us in Monza will be the changes to the track, the resurfacing, changes to curbs and cambers of the track. How the car will be able to ride the curbs in terms of car setup, I think will be a different requirement this year." Even Ferrari's Carlos Sainz, who started on pole position last year, said he was not certain who the new surface would help the most. "It's been resurfaced, so we will find a very different Monza to the last few years," he said. Red Bull was comfortably beaten in the Dutch Grand Prix, raising alarm bells. Max Verstappen's lead in the Drivers' Championship remains a healthy 70 points, but he was crushed by Lando Norris and Zandvoort by 22.9s, the largest margin of victory this season. Whilst Verstappen's advantage is strong, Red Bull is just 30 points ahead of McLaren in the Constructors' Championship, and given the chasm to the Woking-based team at Zandvoort, Red Bull has a problem to deal with. It is an outcome Red Bull was trying to avoid. Going into the summer break, Verstappen and the team announced they were going to analyze its development and upgrades. Red Bull started the season dominantly, but was suddenly caught by the chasing pack from the Miami Grand Prix onwards. McLaren and Mercedes were regularly faster, and updates from Red Bull seemed to make little difference. Instead, the optimal balance in the RB20 was hard to find. The Dutch GP became an experiment for Red Bull. Verstappen and Sergio Perez drove with different parts and setups to see if the car would regain its balance. A floor from the beginning of the season was even used, and parts introduced in Hungary were also reverted. It accomplished nothing. Instead of hoping to rediscover the car's balance, the opposite happened. Verstappen and Perez slid in all directions throughout the weekend, and additional problems were highlighted afterwards. Verstappen was highly critical of the balance, whilst Perez, in particular, questioned the RB20's speed in the medium-speed corners. There is a link between balance and cornering speed, but the comments of both Red Bull drivers show the team seems to have lost its way in terms of development. When you have to switch back to parts of yesteryear in F1, you are already fundamentally behind the times. Interestingly, areas where Red Bull was formidable in recent seasons, like car balance, have become a pressing concern. Tire degradation is another surprising issue. Verstappen started to complain about his tires on lap 15, whilst his pace also dropped considerably whilst on the hard compound for his second stint. Red Bull has not been used to that for some time, because in 2023 tire management was the team's strong point. As soon as the competition started complaining about wear and tear, Verstappen was still able to drive eerily consistent lap times. Now McLaren is a great example for the other teams. Indeed, Norris drove sublimely on both the medium and hard tires. But where did things go wrong for Verstappen at Zandvoort? Team boss Christian Horner had an idea after the race in conversation with Viaplay. "We just didn't have the speed during the race," Horner said. "In hindsight, I think maybe the gamble we took with more downforce was not our best move. And looking at Checo's pace, it seemed like he had an easier time in the second half of the race. But congratulations are in order for Lando and McLaren. They were very fast. We have work to do to find more speed." That is a striking statement from Horner because more downforce should bring more grip and balance to the car. In Verstappen's case, the only effect was significant tire wear. Some might wonder why a top team like Red Bull would gamble with the setup when there is little data available. Rain and wind on Friday morning, and again on Saturday, made it impossible to gather the necessary data for the optimal setup, so logically teams seemed to change little. Only Mercedes is known to have made many changes, but that, like Red Bull, turned out very badly. Is it all doom and gloom then? Of course not. Red Bull used the Dutch GP to gather data to have a basis for the last 9 races. You just have to then turn that knowledge, good or bad, into optimizations, something which has been an issue for Red Bull. Verstappen reported the same problems in the European races before the summer break, and that was prior to an extensive evaluation. The conclusion? The experiment has failed for now, and Red Bull must hand the favorite baton to McLaren on almost all circuits. There are now 2 titles at stake. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.